Have you ever heard whispers of a woman who came before Eve? A woman who refused to obey Adam, who walked out of Eden on her own, and who, according to some, became a dark queen of demons. Who was Lilith? Was she really Adam's first wife? Or just an ancient legend twisted over time? The truth hides in fragments ancient Jewish texts, Babylonian myths, and cryptic medieval manuscripts. And if these sources are true, then the story of humanity's beginning is far more complicated and far more dangerous than we've ever imagined. Before we dive into this forbidden tale, leave 777 in the comments if you love uncovering mysteries the Bible doesn't talk about, and hit like so we can keep exploring these lost stories together. Now, let's go back. Before Eve, before the fall, to a woman who refused to kneel. In Genesis, the creation of humanity seems simple. So God created man in his own image. Male and female, he created them. Genesis 1:27. But if you read carefully, you'll notice something strange. Genesis chapter 1 describes God creating man and woman together at the same time. Yet Genesis chapter 2 tells a different story. Adam is formed first from the dust, and Eve comes later, shaped from Adam's rib. Why two different creation stories? For centuries, rabbis and scholars have wrestled with this contradiction. And in the ancient Jewish mystical text, known as the Alphabet of Ben Sira, an answer was whispered. The woman created with Adam in Genesis 1 was not Eve. Her name was Lilith. According to these old writings, Lilith was not formed from Adam's rib as Eve was. She was made from the same earth as Adam, equal in substance, equal in strength, and that equality was exactly the problem. The story says Adam and Lilith fought constantly. She refused to lie beneath him or be ruled by him, insisting, "We were created equal, and I will not submit." Adam tried to force her, but Lilith would not bow. In fury, she spoke the unspeakable name of God, a power no human was meant to use, and with that forbidden word, she flew from Eden. When Adam begged God to bring her back, 3 angels were sent to find her. They found Lilith by the Red Sea, where she had taken on a new life, one shrouded in shadow. She refused to return, choosing freedom over Eden's perfection. As punishment, the angels cursed her. Every day, 100 of her demon children would die. And from that moment, Lilith's name became a warning. She was said to wander the night, stealing infants from their cradles, seducing men in their dreams, and birthing demonic offspring. Or a woman who simply refused to obey, but was Lilith truly a monster? Here's where things get even stranger. While Lilith is never named in Genesis, some believe she hides in the Old Testament. Isaiah 34:14, describing a desolate land, says, "Wild animals shall meet with hyenas, the goat demon shall call to its kind. There too Lilith shall rest and find for herself a place of repose." In Hebrew, the word used is Lilith, often translated as night creature or screech owl. Is this a direct reference to the same Lilith from Jewish legend? Or was it later interpreters who connected the two, weaving myth into scripture? Long before her name whispered through Jewish texts, Lilith's shadow appeared in ancient Mesopotamia. The Babylonians feared a night demon called Liu, a female spirit who prowled the darkness, preying on mothers and newborns. In Sumerian myth, a similar figure, Lilu, was known to seduce men in their sleep and drain them of life. Could these ancient spirits have merged into the legend of Lilith? Archaeologists have uncovered Mesopotamian amulets inscribed with protective prayers, some specifically designed to ward off Liu. Mothers would place these near cribs, believing the demon woman would steal or harm their infants at night. When Jewish people were exiled to Babylon in the 6th century BC, they encountered these stories. Some scholars believe that over time, Liu merged with the idea of Adam's rebellious first wife, creating the figure we know as Lilith. But was Lilith always a villain? In some older Mesopotamian depictions, she wasn't a monster at all. She was a storm spirit, associated with the fierce independence of the wind. So what changed? Why did a woman who symbolized freedom become demonized? And what they wanted women to believe? If Lilith was Adam's first wife, why doesn't Genesis mention her by name? The answer may lie in who wrote the stories. Many scholars argue that the earliest biblical texts were written by men in a patriarchal society, where obedience and submission were virtues for women. Lilith, a woman who refused to submit to Adam, was the opposite of the ideal they wanted to promote. Eve, by contrast, was perfect for the narrative. Formed from Adam's rib, a symbol of companionship and dependence, not equality. In this light, Lilith's rebellion wasn't just a personal choice. It was a threat to the order ancient society wanted to impose. Some rabbis openly admitted this fear. The Alphabet of Ben Sira, where Lilith's story is recorded, was often used as a moral warning. See what happens to women who reject their husbands. They become cursed, alone, and demonic. But what if Lilith wasn't a demon at all? What if she was simply erased because her story was too dangerous? The erasure of Lilith wasn't complete. Hidden in the margins of ancient texts, her story survived, but in fragments, whispers, and coded warnings. The Zohar, a foundational work of Jewish mysticism, contains dozens of references to Lilith that most people have never heard. In one passage, it describes her as the beauty of women with a serpent's tail, dwelling in a palace made of mirrors in the desert. In another, she's called the Queen of Demons, but also the Mother of Freedom. These weren't just stories. They were warnings passed down through generations of Jewish mothers. Even today, in some Orthodox communities, newborn babies are given amulets with the names of the three angels who confronted Lilith: Senoi, Sanzanoi, and Samangelof. These protective charms were believed to keep Lilith away from vulnerable infants. But here's what's truly fascinating. The Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in 1947, contain fragments that may reference Lilith directly. One scroll, known as the Songs of the Sage, describes a ritual for banishing the first Eve and the mother of demons. Another fragment mentions she who was equal to Adam and the woman who spoke the name. Could these be the earliest written references to Lilith? If so, they push her story back centuries earlier than previously thought. The evidence suggests that Lilith's tale wasn't invented by medieval rabbis. It was an ancient tradition that survived in secret, passed down through oral tradition until it was finally written down. What made Lilith so dangerous that her story had to be hidden? The answer lies in what she represented and what she knew. According to the mystical texts, when Lilith spoke the true name of God to escape Eden, she didn't just gain the power of flight. She gained access to forbidden knowledge, the same knowledge the same thief threw the serpent. Some scholars believe Lilith became the serpent in the Garden of Eden. Think about it. Who else would have known about the tree of knowledge? Who else would have had reason to tempt Eve toward the same rebellion she herself had chosen? The Zohar hints at this connection, describing Lilith as the one who whispers secrets and she who brings the knowledge of good and evil. In some versions of the story, it's not Satan who tempts Eve, it's Lilith, disguised as a serpent, offering the fruit of knowledge to another woman trapped in Eden's perfect prison. This interpretation changes everything. If Lilith was the serpent, then the fall wasn't caused by Satan as rebellion. It was caused by the first woman as refusal to submit, and her attempt to free the second woman from the same fate. But there's another layer to this mystery. Ancient texts describe Lilith as having access to the 72 sacred names of God-hidden names that gave her power over demons, spirits, and even death itself. Where did she learn these names? And why was she the only human ever said to possess this knowledge? The answer may lie in what happened during those first days in Eden days that Genesis barely mentions, but that other texts describe in chilling detail. What if I told you that the Garden of Eden described in Genesis is not the complete story? That hidden texts reveal a darker, more complex paradise, one where the first humans were not alone. The Book of Enoch, excluded from the biblical canon but revered in ancient times, describes Eden as a place where angels walked among humans. It speaks of the Watcher's divine beings who taught forbidden knowledge to humanity. And according to some interpretations, Lilith was their first student. While Adam slept, the story goes, Lilith learned the names of God from the angel Samael, the same angel who would later be called Satan. She learned the secrets of creation, the power of the divine word, and the true nature of good and evil. This knowledge made her Adam's equal, but it also made her dangerous. The rabbis who wrote about Lilith understood this threat. A woman with divine knowledge couldn't be controlled, couldn't be submitted, couldn't be silenced. So they turned her into a demon. They said her knowledge was evil, her independence was sinful, and her refusal to obey was the root of all human suffering. But what if they were wrong? What if Lilith's fall wasn't a punishment, it was an awakening? The ancient texts describe her life after leaving Eden in terms that sound less like a curse and more like a liberation. She built a kingdom by the Red Sea, where she ruled as queen. She gathered around her others who had been cast out, the rebellious angels, the forgotten spirits, the creatures that didn't fit into God's perfect order. And together, they created something new. Some versions of the story describe Lilith's realm as a place of wild freedom, where beings lived according to their own nature, rather than divine command. It was chaos, yes, but it was also authentic. No pretense, no forced submission, no hiding behind the facade of perfection. This is why Lilith became associated with storms, with wind, with the untamed forces of nature. She represented everything that couldn't be controlled, couldn't be domesticated, couldn't be forced into submission. And that terrified the men who wrote the scriptures. What if I told you that the Garden of Eden described in Genesis is not the complete story? That hidden texts reveal a darker, more complex paradise, one where the first humans were not alone? The Book of Enoch, excluded from the biblical canon, but revered in ancient times, describes Eden as a place where angels walked among humans. It speaks of the Watcher's divine beings who taught forbidden knowledge to humanity. And according to some interpretations, Lilith was their first student. While Adam slept, the story goes, Lilith learned the names of God from the angel, Samael, the same angel who would later be called Satan. She learned the secrets of creation, the power of the divine word, and the true nature of good and evil. This knowledge made her Adam's equal, but it also made her dangerous. The rabbis who wrote about Lilith understood this threat. A woman with divine knowledge couldn't be controlled, couldn't be submitted, couldn't be silenced. So they turned her into a demon. They said her knowledge was evil, her independence was sinful, and her refusal to obey was the root of all human suffering. But what if they were wrong? What if Lilith's fall wasn't a punishment, it was an awakening? The ancient texts describe her life after leaving Eden in terms that sound less like a curse and more like a liberation. She built a kingdom by the Red Sea, where she ruled as queen. She gathered around her others who had been cast out, the rebellious angels, the forgotten spirits, the creatures that didn't fit into God's perfect order. And together, they created something new. Some versions of the story describe Lilith's realm as a place of wild freedom, where beings lived according to their own nature rather than divine command. It was chaos, yes, but it was also authentic. No pretense, no forced submission, no hiding behind the facade of perfection. This is why Lilith became associated with storms, with wind, with the untamed forces of nature. She represented everything that couldn't be controlled, couldn't be domesticated, couldn't be forced into submission. And that terrified the men who wrote the scriptures. But Lilith's story doesn't end with her departure from Eden. According to the legends, she didn't disappear into the wilderness. She thrived, and she had children, thousands of them. The texts describe Lilith as incredibly fertile, giving birth to a new demon every day. But what if these demons weren't monsters at all? What if they were simply the offspring of the first free woman beings who inherited her independence, her power, and her refusal to bow? Medieval Jewish texts name some of these children. Agreth, who teaches women to question authority. Lilith, who whispers to men in their dreams, showing them visions of equality. Anoskeles, who dances in the moonlight and reminds people of the joy that comes from being truly free. These weren't demons, they were teachers, spreading throughout the world, carrying their mother's message of rebellion and freedom. And according to some traditions, they're still here, still teaching, still whispering the same message Lilith spoke in Eden. We were created equal, and we will not submit. Some scholars believe this is why Lilith became associated with feminism in the modern era. Not because feminists worship demons, but because they recognize in Lilith's story the same struggle they face today, the fight for equality, the refusal to accept subordination, the willingness to be called a monster rather than live as a slave. In this light, every woman who has ever stood up to injustice, every woman who has refused to be silenced, every woman who has chosen freedom over safety, they are all daughters of Lilith, children of the first woman who said no to oppression. But the legend goes deeper than that. Some texts suggest that Lilith's children aren't just her biological offspring. They re everyone who carries her spirit of rebellion, men and women alike who refuse to accept that inequality is natural, that submission is virtue, that freedom is sin. In every generation, the story goes, Lilith's children are born again, not demons, but revolutionaries, not monsters, but truth-tellers, not evil spirits, but free spirits. And they carry within them the same power their mother possessed, the power to speak truth to authority, the power to refuse unjust commands, the power to choose freedom, even when it costs everything. So why was Lilith's story buried for so long? Why did the church fathers and rabbis work so hard to erase her from history? The answer reveals something profound about the nature of power and the stories we tell to maintain it. Lilith's tale wasn't just hidden because it was heretical. It was hidden because it was revolutionary, because it suggested that the natural order men ruling over women, authority demanding submission, power justifying itself, wasn't natural at all. It was a choice. And if it was a choice, it could be changed. Think about what Lilith's story really says, that the first woman was created equal to the first man, that she had the same access to divine knowledge and power, that her refusal to submit wasn't sin, it was self-respect, that her departure from Eden wasn't a fall, it was an escape. This wasn't just a story about one woman's rebellion. It was a blueprint for revolution, a reminder that every system of oppression, no matter how ancient or sacred, began with someone making a choice. And if someone chose it, someone else could choose differently. The men who controlled religious institutions understood this threat. They knew that if women heard Lilith's story, really heard it, they might start asking dangerous questions. Why should I submit to authority I didn't choose? Why should I accept limits I didn't set? Why should I be grateful for freedom I was born with? So they turned Lilith into a cautionary tale. They made her a demon, a child stealer, a seductress. They said her rebellion led to suffering, her independence led to loneliness, her freedom led to damnation. But the truth leaked out anyway, in folktales passed down by grandmothers, in mystical texts hidden in monastery libraries, in the dreams of women who never heard her name but felt her spirit. And now, in an age where information can no longer be controlled, where ancient texts are being translated and shared, where women are asking the same questions Lilith asked in Eden, now her story is being told again. Not as a demon myth, but as a liberation theology. Not as a cautionary tale, but as a call to action. Not as ancient history, but as contemporary revolution. Because the same choice Lilith faced in Eden is the choice every generation faces. Submit to unjust authority, or choose freedom. Accept the roles you're given, or create your own destiny, live in the prison of perfection, or embrace the chaos of authenticity. Lilith chose freedom, and in doing so, she became not humanity's first sinner, but humanity's first liberator. The first person to look at divine authority and say, "No, I choose another way." But here's the most important question of all. If Lilith's story is true, what does it mean for us today? What does it mean to carry the legacy of the first woman who refused to kneel? It means that the struggle for equality isn't new, it's as old as humanity itself. It means that the desire for freedom isn't a modern invention. It has been burning in human hearts since the beginning of time. It means that every person who has ever felt the call to rebel against injustice is connected to something ancient and sacred. The spirit of Lilith lives in every woman who refuses to accept, "because I said so," as a valid reason for inequality. It lives in every man who recognizes that true partnership requires mutual respect, not domination. It lives in every person who chooses authenticity over approval, truth over comfort, freedom over security. But embracing the spirit of Lilith isn't easy. It requires courage to stand alone when everyone else is kneeling. It requires strength to speak truth when others prefer comfortable lies. It requires wisdom to know when rebellion serves justice and when it serves only ego. Lilith's story reminds us that freedom always comes with a price. She gained independence but lost Eden. She gained power but lost paradise. She gained truth but lost comfort. The question each of us must answer is, are we willing to pay that price? Are we willing to leave our own versions of Eden, the comfortable prisons of conformity, the golden cages of approval, the safe spaces of submission, to find authentic freedom? Because that's what Lilith's story ultimately offers us. Not a promise that rebellion is easy, but a reminder that it's possible. Not a guarantee that freedom is comfortable, but a demonstration that it's worth any price. Not a fairy tale about perfect endings, but a real story about the courage to begin. Every day, we face the same choice Lilith faced. Will we submit to authority that demands we diminish ourselves? Will we accept roles that require us to deny our full humanity? Will we stay in relationships, jobs, communities, or beliefs that insist we make ourselves smaller to fit in? Or will we choose the path of the first woman who said, "No"? Will we speak our truth, even when it's inconvenient? Will we claim our power, even when it's frightening? Will we choose freedom, even when it costs us everything we thought we wanted? This is the gift of Lilith's story, not just the knowledge that rebellion is possible, but the reminder that it's necessary. That every generation must choose whether to perpetuate the systems that oppress them or to break free and create something new. That the price of freedom is eternal vigilance, not just against external tyrants, but against the internal voices that whisper, "We should be grateful for our cages." Lilith's story teaches us that the path to authentic freedom begins with a single word: no. No to unjust authority. No to diminishing ourselves. No to accepting less than we deserve. No to living someone else's version of our life. And from that no, everything else becomes possible. The yes to our own truth. The yes to our own power. The yes to our own freedom. The yes to a life lived on our own terms. This is why Lilith's story matters. Not because it's historically accurate, though it might be. Not because it's religiously orthodox, though it reveals deep truths. But because it reminds us that we always have a choice. That no matter how ancient the authority, how sacred the tradition, how comfortable the cage, we always have the power to choose freedom. We always have the power to choose ourselves. We always have the power to walk away from any garden that demands we kneel. We always have the power to become who we were meant to be. That's the true message of Lilith's story. Not that rebellion is easy, but that it's always possible. Not that freedom is comfortable, but that it's always worth it. Not that we should reject all authority, but that we should never accept authority that requires us to reject ourselves. In the end, Lilith's greatest gift wasn't her rebellion against Adam or her defiance of God. It was her refusal to abandon herself, her insistence that she was worth more than submission, her choice to be authentically herself, even when it meant being completely alone. And that gift is still available to us today. Every time we choose truth over comfort, every time we choose ourselves over approval, every time we choose freedom over security, every time we say no to anything that diminishes us and yes to everything that makes us whole. In those moments, we become daughters and sons of Lilith, children of the first woman who refused to kneel, inheritors of the ancient courage to choose freedom, carriers of the eternal flame of rebellion against everything that would make us less than we are. And in carrying that flame, we keep alive the most important truth of all, that we were not created to submit. We were not born to serve. We were not meant to kneel. We were created to be free. And that freedom is not a gift to be granted by others. It is a birthright to be claimed by ourselves. This is the legacy of Lilith. This is the gift of her story. This is the truth they tried to hide. But the truth cannot be hidden forever, and neither can we.